This is the second part of the sound stimulus and the ear, or the auditory system. So we just finished talking about those wrinkles in the waveform and how they give us the experience of timbre. And just to show this in another way, and so Dr. Scott Laird, I hope you did watch that, because it really does, I think it helps a lot for discussing how if what I'm looking at is a 200 hertz tone and it's playing on some instrument, it's going to have these harmonics. Okay, it's going to have the fundamental frequency, which is the 200 hertz sine wave that is showing there in B. In C, though, you can see that it's also containing a 400 hertz harmonic. In D, you can see it contains a 600 hertz harmonic, and in E, it's showing an 800 hertz harmonic. And those are being put together, right, for that complex waveform that we see in A. That is including 200, 400, 600, and 800 hertz. And you can see that these are all multiples of 200 hertz. 200 times 2, 200 times 3, 200 times 4. And another thing that then that means, right, is that so if I subtract 600 from 800, that is a 200 hertz difference. If I subtract 400 from 600, that is a 200 hertz difference. So that information about the fundamental frequency is being maintained because it's also in the differences between the harmonics. I'm going to show this why this is important in a second here. And so this is important for pitch periodicity, where when we remove the fundamental frequency or some harmonic, that we're still perceiving the 200 hertz tone and at a certain timbre. And so it's, to me, kind of mind-blowing. And when we talk about the pitch neurons in the brain, they take this up to really high. So I'm just going to give the example of 2200 hertz, 2400 hertz, and 2600 hertz. These are pretty high tones. And that's still, if we just have those three, 2200, 2400, and 2600, they are going to sound like a 200 hertz tone to us with a certain kind of timbre, because 2400 minus 2200 is 200, and 2600 minus 2400 is 200. So that, again, that information is being maintained in those differences. So what you can see that's being shown in the bottom is they've pulled out the 200 hertz tone. They've just left in the, that particular sine wave. They've left in the 400, 600, 800, and people are still going to hear a 200 hertz tone. So we get the same pitch with different patterns of vibration, and we see the same perceived pitch but with a different timbre. And this is what we mean by periodicity pitch, when we remove some fundamental or some harmonics and we're still perceiving the same pitch, it's just with a different timbre. And this is said relatively quickly in the book, like in 2 sentences, just like this. But when I used to leave it out, I would have students in orchestra or something that would talk about, well, what about the attack of tones and the decay of tones? Those are also important. There are several other little things that also add to our perception of timbre, but it is important. The attack of tones, so that buildup of sound at the beginning of a tone, and the decay of tones, that decrease in sound at the end of a tone. Actually, if we play a tone for a very short amount of time from whatever instrument, and we go in and we electronically cut off the attacks and decays, people have a harder time recognizing what instrument that is. So the attack and the decay, they do tell us about the timbre of an instrument. I'm going to talk a little bit about our range of hearing. We have a frequency range that we can hear in from about 20 hertz, so 20 cycles per second, to about 20,000 hertz, 20,000 cycles per second. And speech is right in there at 2,000 to 4,000 hertz. And if you can see in our audibility curves, as they are called over on the right there, I'm going to look at the threshold for hearing, which is that green line, and you can see that our sound pressure level, our amplitude, we need the least amount of amplitude right there between 2000 to 4000 hertz. And my assumption is that animals basically hear each other's speech, that that's what they're going to be most sensitive to. It's certainly true for us. And then as we get into either lower pitches or higher pitches, we need those to be louder for us to even hear them. Okay, and this is what I was talking about, how amplitude gives us loudness, but we have to have plus frequency in there a little bit, because we have these frequency intensity relations that show us our audibility curve. And you can see also it's kind of attenuated for our threshold for pain, but once we get up to about 120 decibels, that is most likely causing us some pain and probably killing our inner hair cells. And so I took this picture from Goldstein as our sensitivity varies within this frequency range, and why, again, I'm going to just repeat it, but with these A, B, C, and D, if you can see them on my picture there, with explaining using those, why the perception of loudness is amplitude for the most part, but we have to have this plus frequency in there, kind of smaller. So if we're looking at something that is 40 decibels, if we're down there at the low A on the piano, so 27.5 hertz, at 40 decibels, we're not even going to hear it. It's underneath. You see how it's underneath the audibility curve of what we can hear. If we have something that's 100 hertz, so we're up a couple of octaves on the A on the piano at 110 hertz, but this is 100 hertz. At 40 decibels, it's going to be just at our range of hearing. It's going to be just barely audible. And if we're up at 1000 hertz and it's 40 decibels, then that's as loud as conversational speech at that frequency. And you can also see that C and D, those are on the equal loudness curve, so those are going to sound the same, even though C at 1000 hertz is at 40 decibels and D at 100 hertz is at 60 decibels. So we can change that amplitude, but it depends on frequency to some extent of what our perception of loudness is going to be. And different animals hear different frequencies than we do. I think most of us know this because of the dog whistles that are at a higher frequency, that we can't hear them, but the dog can. You can see that dogs are well into between 10,000 and 100,000, so they're past the 20,000 hertz range. You might just want to look at this and pause for a moment as how interesting this is, especially if you're an animal lover. That dolphins are in these very high frequencies. Mice are in higher frequencies than we realized. For a long time, they used to think that mother mice found their babies by smell, and then they realized that the babies were making this really high-pitched squeal that we could not hear, and that the mother mouse was following their cries. One of the most interesting ones to me is the elephant, which has this blank in the middle, so they hear these higher frequencies up to about 10,000 hertz that they communicate with each other when they're close to each other. But they also can hear lower frequencies, and especially from farther away, they hear the lower frequencies, lower than our threshold of hearing. So I know when I was in school, I was studying language, and some of my friends always talked about how, well, people are smarter than animals because we have syntax. And I thought, well, that's silly. We don't even really know if elephants or dolphins have syntax because we don't understand their language. And at that time, we didn't even know that elephants were communicating in these low frequencies. But I'll just go ahead and say, since I'm talking about it, that dolphins, we can train them to, with our visual signs, to dunk a ball and then jump, or to jump and then dunk a ball. So they're actually understanding our syntax to some extent, at least with sign language. So I'm not really sure that's something that I adhere to. And then my final audibility curve, showing some audibility thresholds, as they're called, shows some impairment due to aging. And we can see that this is, we see more impairment in people who live in industrialized societies. We used to think men had more impairment than women, and they did, but that appeared to be mostly because they were the ones working in factories and places where there were lots of loud noises. Impairment appears to be when we're at that threshold of pain, we are damaging our inner hair cells and our outer hair cells. And so comparing somebody who's in normal hearing, you all can hear many more, especially mid to high frequency sounds than I can hear as a person who's been to too many concerts and listened to her music too loud and knew this was happening because I took this class when I was your age. But we start to lose those higher frequencies as we age, especially if we've done this damage. And I think I come back to this at some point if we have time. So that was the sound stimulus, various aspects of the sound stimulus. And we finally got into the ear and the auditory system. The auditory system has three basic tasks. One, to deliver the sound stimulus to the receptors, so our sensory receptors. Then two, of course, the receptors need to transduce that stimulus from those pressure changes to electrical signals. And then three, we need to process those electrical signals so that they can indicate for us pitch, loudness, and timbre, which we've talked about, and location. And I'm going to talk about this in auditory localization, that, you know, our visual world, when we're looking at it, where it's localized in space is there on the retina, but that's really different for our sense of hearing. There are three major parts of the ear, or major areas of the ear: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And I'm going to walk us through all of these, but you can see in this outer ear that pinna, and that sound is traveling down the auditory canal and hitting the eardrum, or the tympanic membrane. That's the outer ear. The middle ear are those three ossicles, those three smallest bones of your body: the hammer, anvil, and stirrup, or the malleus, incus, and stapes. And then our inner ear is being shown there in what looks like a shell that we might find on the beach, which is what cochlea means, shell, as well as it also off the shell comes those three semicircular canals, which is more about balance. So we won't talk about that in this class. And then of course the auditory nerve, which that's past the inner ear. So for the ear, we're going to stick to this outer, middle, and inner ear, that cochlea. The outer ear includes the pinna, the auditory canal, and the tympanic membrane, or the eardrum. And there's just the picture again. I'm going to walk us through. I'm probably just going to get to the pinnae, as the plural is, today. So the outer ear, the thing we notice about people's ears, and when we're talking about people's ears, is probably we're probably talking about their pinnae, right, or what we can see of their ears. These are individualistic, from what I understand, like fingerprints. Everybody's pinna or pinnae are specific to themselves. They are capturing sound for us. They're also, we're going to talk about them when we talk about auditory localization, because they're helping us to localize sound. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in when you all are here with me, as we can see the different pinnae of different animals are as adaptive as really where the receptors are in our eyes. And I usually pick the bunny and the owl as ones to really talk about, because the bunny, you can see how large the ears are. It is a prey animal. It needs to hear if there is something coming at it. And those ears, as I know most of you guys have seen bunnies do this, they can move their ears around. And so when we talk about their subcortical structures, or our subcortical structures, for hearing where sounds are, like the inferior colliculus, theirs are a bit larger than ours, because they have to actually take into account also which way are my ears pointing, just the way we have to take into account which way are my eyes pointing when we're moving our eyes around. The owl is also very cool. And I usually ask the question if anybody knows where that ear is on the owl. And every once in a while someone knows it. And it's awesome. So actually, since I have to answer my own questions, its whole face is really it's pinna. The whole face is capturing sound. They are night predatory animals that fly at night, and they are using their own sonar, right? They're using their own frequencies being sent out in order to navigate, but also to find animals. They need to hear those animals. So I'm just putting this picture back up in our basics here to have a bit of a summary slide of how we have finally gotten to the auditory system itself, or the ear at this point of where we are, and just talked about really what we notice about the ear, the pinna, that part of the outer ear. And we're going to have to finish up with this. So I really wanted to, I skipped over visual attention. This is going to be a little disjointed, even with the learning modules. I'm doing this so that it's a little disjointed because I never know exactly where things are going to finish up, and then I really like to play my games with the class whenever I can and not just lecture. And I feel like a lot of the first part of the auditory system is me lecturing or showing a video, and that can be all done through YouTube. But we get to do a little bit with visual attention on Monday. We'll have to come back to this auditory system on Wednesday. And so a lot of the times right now I'm just reusing a bit and splicing in a bit, but to have this kind of new summary slide and figuring things out on a Friday. I hope you all do have a good weekend. I hope everything is going well with everybody. You're staying safe, you're staying healthy, and I look forward to kind of seeing you as much as possible on Monday.